Mahilig ka ba sa mga kuwentong katatakutan, makapanindig-balahibo at kakila-kilabot? Kung oo, halika at pasukin mo ang mundo ng kilabot.com. Mag-ingat, mapanganib ang iyong papasukin. Kilabot.com Philippine Horror Stories Collection Volume 1. Copyright 2019 by Precious Pages Corporation. The Walking Stick ni Rita Garcia. Narrated by AJ Caloza. She listened intently, and true enough, she heard the same tapping sound, only now it was getting louder. As if whoever was walking with the stick was coming closer. Yes, to our room. Last Holy Week, I accepted Cecil's invitation to go with her to Mabalacat, Pampanga. She had been my best friend for the past 8 years, and each year around this time, she would prod me to go with her to Mabalacat. This year, I finally relented. My parents were having the vacation of their lives in Phuket, Thailand, and my younger brother was planning his own trip to Tagaytay with his own barkada. I imagined the whole week would be uneventful, if not boring, if I spent it in the house with only the house help around. So when Cecil's invitation came, I immediately grabbed it. Until then, I had never been to Mabalacat, and when Cecil told me of the place, I was already thinking of food. The last time I had been to our own province was close to 8 years ago, and the food there was great. Admittedly, that is one of the simple pleasures one begins to miss in the suburbs, that and the promise of fresh air. The travel time to Mabalacat was shorter than I imagined. Nevertheless, I was thankful. We arrived at the Santos compound a few minutes past 6 in the evening. Cecil told me the trip would have been taking a bit longer had we taken the bus instead of using our own family van. I was pleased that my younger brother had agreed to let me use it. The long drive was a first for me. Prior to this trip, the farthest place I had been to was Caloocan. It was a good thing Cecil herself knew how to drive. We took turns in driving until we finally got to our destination. We both enjoyed the spontaneity and the challenge. Her being adventurous and her willingness to take uncalculated risks were some of the reasons why we became the closest of friends. We arrived just in time for dinner. Cecil's relatives were expecting us and had prepared a sumptuous menu. Kapampangans had always been known for being lavish and for being generous. The food on the table looked more fit for a party of 12 than for 2 skinny Manileñas. The introductions were brief. Cecil's grandmother put it all to a close by saying we would be there for the entire week, and that would be enough time to know everybody. What was more pressing was the fact that the food was waiting, and it was not proper to leave it at that. At dinner, Cecil gave me a brief background of the place. The compound had 4 houses in it. The largest and oldest was where we're staying. Generations of the Santos family had lived in it. It had been her great-grandmother's, and most probably, it had been passed on to her by some older relatives. The 3 other houses were more recent, having been built a few years before Cecil's great-grandmother passed away. They were intended for her great-grandmother's 4 children. Cecil's grandfather, being the oldest, had by way of tradition inherited the old house, while the 3 other houses were bequeathed to his sisters and their only brother. And so, just like any other province, the compound was a close circle of lolos and lolas, either by relation or by marriage. In fact, as soon as I got off the van upon arrival, I had difficulty remembering who was Lolo who and who was Lola who. There were just so many old people in the compound. It was not to mention a few other old folks who had dropped by just to welcome Cecil on her vacation. Surprisingly, the main house still had no television set, although when I inquired about it, Lola Celia's, which is Cecil's grandmother, was quick to say that one of the other houses had won, if I indeed wanted to watch. Cecil's grandparents had not bothered to buy their own television set because they were more fond of listening to the radio and reading the newspapers. Cecil would whisper to me it was a common problem with her old folks to adjust to anything new. After dinner, Cecil's relatives gathered by the veranda to tell each other stories. I guess it was their favorite pastime. Not a few questions were asked about me, my family, and how it was like in my native province of Cabanatuan. After a few more hours, it was already time to retire to bed. Cecil and I shared a room, which Lola Celia said used to be Cecil's father's when he was still single. The bed was big enough for 2 people and had one side of it against the wall. The long drive and what seemed to be a long morning spent preparing for the trip must have taken its toll, and so we immediately fell asleep. It was probably past midnight when I was awakened by a strange noise. I strained to listen. It was unmistakably the sound of wood on wood. Then I realized what it could only be. The sound of a walking stick hitting the floorboards. The house, like many of its kind during the same era, had floors of long spans of wooden planks. Cecil was sound asleep while I listened to that unmistakable tapping. Tok, 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 tok. Whoever was walking with the stick must be in the living room. Tok, 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 tok. The sound was growing fainter, like it was moving away. It was now coming from the kitchen. I tried to imagine who among the old people in the house could be it. Lola Celia did not use a cane, neither did Lolo Pedro, her husband. Lola Belinda, Lolo Pedro's sister, occupied a room near the kitchen. Could it possibly be her? I listened intently until the sound finally died down. When I could no longer hear anything, I went back to sleep. The following morning, while we were having breakfast, I suddenly had the urge to ask about what I heard during the night. Lola, narinig niyo ho ba yung kagabi? Ano yun? Meron kasi ako narinig na parang naglalakad na may baston, I said, whereupon I caught the reaction on their faces. Everyone at the breakfast table seemed to have been drained of color. Bakit po? I inquired, afraid that I must have said something wrong. Oh, wala yun, Iha. Lolo Pedro answered. Baka naman yung tuko yung narinig mo, Cecil suggested. Tuko? Oo, marami nun dito, she explained. Lalo't makapalang kawayan dun sa may likod bahay. Dun sila nakatira. Baka ngayon ang narinig mo. Napagkamalan mo lang. Ang tunog kasi nun, tuko, tuko. Baka nga, I answered after noticing that Lola Benildas did not have a cane either. When we had finished breakfast, I retired to the veranda while Cecil helped clear the table. I wanted to help, but they said it was not right for a visitor to get her hands dirty doing such chores. I was peering at the large mango tree, which stood right in the front of the house, when I felt cold air brush against my skin, as if someone had swiftly passed behind me. When I turned to check, I saw that there was no one there. I quickly shrugged it off. While my parents hailed from Cabanatuan, I had been born and was raised entirely in Manila, and was the last person to get frightened by a brush of cold air. What caught my attention was the long, slender wooden stick by the door frame. It stood against the wall. I picked it up to examine it. The wood was dark brown, a black camagong likely, with a smooth and shiny finish to it. Its length extended up to my waist. I thought it was perfect for carrying one's body weight. I tried to walk a few steps with it, and was surprised to hear the same sound I heard the previous night. Just then, Cecil joined me on the veranda. Cecil, hindi to ko yung narinig ko. Ganito ang tunog, I said and tapped the tip of the cane on the wooden floor. Tok, tok, tok. Saan mo nakuha yan? She asked. Her face was full of disbelief. It looked like she was more concerned with how I got hold of the cane rather than the sound I have asked her to listen to. Dito, I said, returning the cane to where I had found it. Dito? She exclaimed, as if that alone was too hard to comprehend. Dito nga. I smiled to reassure her. Cecil, bakit nasa iyo yan? Lola Celia asked when she saw us. Nakita raw ni Rita dito, Lola, Cecil answered. When Lola Celia remained silent, she asked her, Hindi ba? Hindi naman dito nilalagay to, Lola. Di ba dapat nakatago to? Oo, itinago ko iyan. Ako mismo ang nagligpit niyan. Lola Celia said, Akin na. Cecil handed the cane to her grandmother. Lola Celia took it and left us. Ano ba kasi yun? Parang napaka-importante. I quipped. Kay Lola Pinang. Lola Pinang? I could not recall any old woman of that name being introduced to me when we arrived yesterday. Lolo Pedro's mother. The one who used to own this house? Yes. I thought she's already dead. She is. And after her death, Lola Celia made sure the cane would not get lost so she keeps it in her hiding place. Ang hindi ko lang alam kung yung sino naglabas nun dito. I figured out how the cane ended by the door, somehow. Someone had used it last night and left it there. I was so sure it was what that caused the noise I heard last night. I tried to keep the idea of Lola Pinang's ghost at the back of my mind. But knowing that not one soul in the house would be mischievous enough to pull such a prank left me with no other explanation. And now, since Cecil had already mentioned Lola Pinang, she decided to show me the pictures of the old woman. She led me to the living room, where at least 3 volumes of photo albums chronicled her lineage. And there she was, Lola Pinang. Staring from some of the photos, she was already at the same age as Lola Celia when most of her photos were taken. She looked very nice and cheerful. She always seemed to know where the camera was and never failed to smile. And on each photograph was a consistent detail, her walking stick, always by her side. Naabutan mo pa ba siya? I asked Cecil. Hindi na. Siguro nag-abot pa kami pero sobrang bata ko pa nun. Kaya hindi ko na siya matandaan. She smiled. Do you want to know a secret? She asked. What? Noong unang bakasyon ko rito, siguro mga 10 years old ako noon. I heard the same thing. She confessed. Hindi nga! I could not believe what she said. Oo, pero wala akong pinagsabihan. Isa pa, pagkatapos naman ng ilang gabi nawala rin. Hindi ko na narinig ulit. Ano sa tingin mo? I asked. Ewan ko, ayokong takutin ka. She said candidly. You mean? Sa tingin ko, nangingilala lang siya. Bagong mukha ka kasi, she explained. Hindi man naman kasi sinabing may multo rito sa inyo. Malay ko, basta magkasama naman tayo. Kung siya man yun, hindi ka aanuhin nun. But what Cecil said failed to assure me. I made sure we were busy the rest of the day. We went as far as the town plaza, on foot, and met some of our childhood friends. I welcomed the busy schedule. Since last night's incident, I wanted to tire myself to make sure that come bedtime, I'd be sound asleep. True enough, we were so wasted with the flurry of activities that a few minutes after retiring to bed, both of us had already dozed off. Unfortunately, at most the time as last night, I was again awakened by the sound of the walking stick tapping the floor. This time I got really scared. Of course, the knowledge of what was causing the noise doubled my fear. Tok, tok, tok. The sound was coming from the sala. At this point, I decided to wake Cecil up. Oh, bakit? She said, peering through sleepy eyes. Hindi mo ba narinig? Tok, tok, tok. She listened intently, and true enough, she heard the same tapping sound. Only now it was getting louder, as if whoever was walking with the stick was coming closer. Yes, to our room. When we both realized this, we pulled the sheets over to our heads. Tok, tok, tok. The sound came closer to our room, and then it stopped. Cecil and I managed to have a sigh of relief, only to panic a few seconds later. The sound that followed was the turning of the doorknob of our room. Then we heard it swing slowly open. Cecil and I were already hugging each other tight under the sheets. Then the sound started again. Tok, tok, tok. I closed my eyes. I knew that whatever or whoever it was already standing at the foot of the bed. I heard Cecil speak but did not dare to open my eyes. Lola, si Cecil po ito. Yung apo ninyo sa tuhod. Kaibigan ko po si Rita, she said. We waited with bated breath, but the sound had stopped. We fell asleep glued together, sweating under the covers. The next morning, when we woke up, we were no longer surprised to see that the door had been left open. When my feet tried to reach the slippers from under the bed, I stepped on something round, smooth, and solid. When I looked, there was Lola Pinang's walking stick lying on the floor. Lola Celia was surprised when we handed the cane to her. She had stashed it away herself and was sure that she had never told anyone else where it was. And yet it reappeared in our room. That night, Cecil and I stayed awake waiting for the now familiar sound. But we never heard it again during the remainder of our vacation. She was probably right. Maybe her great-grandmother was just curious about the new visitor. Ang kwentong ito ay bahagi ng kilabot.com Volume 1, Philippines Horror Story Collection.